Welcome to Twilight Terror Stories. Twilight is not just the end of day, it's the beginning of something else. A time when the shadows stretch and fear takes its first breath. You've stepped into that moment now, and the stories are waiting. Let them find you. This wasn't my place, not anymore. The thought looped, a dismal mantra as I traced worn paths on the hallway floorboards of the house that built me. 2 a.m. tick. Through the sliver of Leo's bedroom door, the rhythmic sigh of his ventilator was the only constant. But Mom, frayed at every edge, needed respite, and who else was there? Leo's decline had been precipitous this last year, a constellation of symptoms the specialists termed fulminant neurodegeneration. Clinical poetry for the stark truth. My brother, 32 years young, was being unmade piece by piece, his body forgetting its functions, the cause an infuriating void. My phone flared, a harsh blue nebula in the gloom. 2:07. Hours stretched ahead, a desolate expanse until the morning caregiver's arrival. My tread whispered on the polished wood, swallowed by the kitchen's cavernous hush. Night hollowed this house out, magnifying its emptiness. Outside, the suburban quietude wasn't absence but presence, pressing thick against the window panes. The coffee machine coughed to life, a sputtering counterpoint to the silence. Vigilance was paramount. Leo's breathing could falter, become erratic, demanding swift intervention with the BiPAP controls. I sagged against the cool granite countertop, thumbs digging into tired eye sockets. That's when it sliced through the stillness. "Hey." Leo's voice, impossibly whole, drifting from the darkened backyard. A jolt, electric. My own pulse hammered against the fingers still pressed to my face. Absurd. Leo hadn't managed more than a strained whisper in months, let alone walked anywhere. Out here. Need a hand. Sharper now, insistent. My mouth felt like sand. Drawn to the kitchen window, I peered into the inky blackness. Nothing disturbed the motion sensor light. The yard lay inert, a familiar tableau of Mom's sleeping garden beds and Dad's skeletal tool shed. Leo. The name was a ghost on my lips. Only the chirr of crickets and the low thrum of a neighbor's distant air conditioner answered. Barefoot on the hardwood, I nearly slid running back to his room. The door groaned open under my push. He was there, precisely as I'd left him, ensconced in the medical bed, the mask a pale fixture on his face, his chest executing its steady mechanical rise and fall. The machine's illuminated display glowed with reassuringly normal numbers. Tremors started in my hands as I fumbled for my phone, activating the flashlight. Its stark beam carved through the domestic shadows. Living room, vacant couches and chairs like sleeping beasts. Dad's study, surrendered to dust motes dancing in the artificial light. Guest bathroom, the maddening, rhythmic drip from the faucet Mom swore she'd fix. Back in the kitchen, coffee sloshed over the rim as I poured, my hand betraying me. Exhaustion, surely. 20 hours awake warps perception, conjures phantoms. The coffee scalded my tongue, a bitter anchor. "I'm in here now." Leo's voice again, chillingly close, from the hallway directly behind me. The mug slipped, exploding against the tile. Hot liquid splashed my shins, a distant sensation, because that voice, Not merely similar, but him. The cadence, the faint echo of his university days in Boston, the timbre untouched by illness. "Not funny," I rasped at the empty space, my voice thin and cracking. "Who is that?" Only silence answered, deep and watchful. From the knife block, I pulled the heavy chef's knife, Mum's weapon against vegetables. Its handle felt alien in my slick palm. Reason screamed fatigue, hallucination. But reason had lost its grip. The hallway yawned, a tunnel punctuated only by the faint cerulean glow of the nightlight near the bathroom. One step. A floorboard cried out, the sound amplified in the tense quiet. Check the closet. Closer still, near the front door now. My heart battered my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in my chest. My free hand slapped at the hall light switch. Click. Nothing. Burned out bulb. I shuffled forward, spine scraping the wall, the knife a useless weight. Reaching the corner where the hall turned towards the entrance, I sucked in a breath and whipped my head around. Empty. The deadbolt on the front door remained firmly shot home. Impenetrable. I wrenched open the coat closet. A tangle of winter coats and forgotten shoes stared back. A sudden, heavy thump reverberated from the floor above, directly overhead. Ice flooded my veins. Upstairs? Impossible. I hadn't ventured there. Leo's world and mine tonight was confined to this ground floor, his room carved from Dad's old office space. Another thump. Then the unmistakable drag and fall of footsteps crossing the upper landing. Scrambling back towards Leo's room, my breath came in ragged bursts. He slept on, oblivious, the ventilator hissing its steady rhythm. I eased his door shut, the click of the latch deafeningly loud. Phone out again, fingers shaken violently. Police? Tell them. What? My brother's disembodied voice was haunting the house. That phantom footsteps paced the locked-up second floor. More steps overhead. Slow now. Measured. They paused, directly above us. I flattened myself against the wall beside the door, knife held high, muscles screaming with tension. The house's central air system roared to life, and a strangled yelp escaped me. "Look at him," the voice murmured, now just outside the bedroom door. Leo's voice, filled with a dreadful intimacy. So peaceful. My breath hitched. The doorknob began to rotate, agonizingly slow, unnervingly precise. I braced, knife angled to strike. The door swung inward. Nothing. The hallway stretched vacant and still. Frozen, I waited, listening. Only the ventilator's whir and the frantic percussion of my own heart filled the void. Then a new sound. Wet, heavy, dragging. Like dead weight being hauled across the floorboards, inch by laborious inch. Coming closer. Flight screamed through me, but Leo lay helpless. Whatever lurked out there, I was his only shield. The dragon ceased, just beyond the threshold. Want to see what I really look like now? The voice shifted, still Leo's, yet horribly distorted, submerged, bubbling up from some impossible depth. Movement flickered in the hall's deep shadows. A shape detached itself from the darkness, coalescing, rising. Tall, impossibly tall, stretching, elongating towards the ceiling. A suggestion of a face nightmarishly skewed, proportions hideously wrong. The scream tore from my throat, raw and primal. I lunged, knife flashing wildly at the amorphous horror. My blade met only air. I stumbled forward into the hallway. It was gone. The space was empty, mocking. I slammed Leo's door shut, fumbled the lock, then threw my weight against his heavy oak dresser, shoving it across the floor until it jammed hard against the door frame. The scraping noise was violent, ugly, but necessary. A barricade. My phone showed 2:43 a.m. 4 eternal hours remained. I sank to the floor beside Leo's bed, knife clutched tight, and listened. The voice whispered and called sporadically through the night, a ghastly tour of the house, sometimes Leo, sometimes that warped parody. More footsteps echoed, more dragging sounds scraped against the silence, but the barricade held. Nothing breached the door. At 7 sharp, the nurse's key turned in the lock. She found me slumped against the wall, the knife on the floor beside me. Her questions about the dresser, the shattered mug, the coffee stains were met with a mumbled, "Rough night." What else was there? Leo slept through the entire ordeal, his peace undisturbed. When he eventually surfaced, he was unchanged, trapped within his failing body, his voice locked away. Later that morning, I called Mom. "Work," I said, "too demanding. I couldn't do the overnights anymore." Disappointment thickened her voice, but she accepted it. Guilt gnawed, sharp and persistent, but the memory of that house at night, the certainty of what I heard, what I saw, I couldn't return. Something resided there now, alongside Leo. Something wearing his voice like a stolen coat, patient, waiting for the door to be left unguarded again. Sometimes, late, alone in the sterile quiet of my apartment, my phone vibrates. The screen displays Leo's name, Leo's number. I always let it ring, because Leo cannot make calls, and I know with chilling certainty who is really on the other end. Last night, the familiar cadence returned, a phantom tread pacing the roof skin directly above my skull, precise, insistent, traversing the graveled expanse of the Harborview Tower. Here's the rub. 8 years I've walked these halls, Elias Thorne, custodian, night watchman, keeper of keys. That roof, mine alone to access. A steel door, bolted and padlocked, stands sentinel. Thrice nightly, I confirm its integrity. Yet someone, something, finds its way. It began 3 weeks gone. My ritual unfolded as ever. The slow pilgrimage through silent floors, testing locks on windows and doors before the 11 p.m. departure. That's when the first trespass became known. Near the humming bulk of the rooftop HVAC units, a scatter of spent Marlboro Reds. Absent during the morning sweep. I don't indulge. I gathered the crimson-banded filters into my refuse sack, irritation simmering, then descended to verify the access door, heavy-gauge steel, deadbolt thrown, padlock secure. The keys, master set 4, jangled reassurance from my belt loop, issued by management on my first day. No duplicates exist. I've made certain. The following evening yielded more. Identical cigarette ends and, stark against the gray ballast, the clear impress of work boots. Size 11, perhaps 12. A giant stride compared to my own 9 and worn sneakers. I captured the evidence with my phone, dispatched the images to my supervisor. His reply? A digital shrug. Ensure proper lockup, Elias. As if I didn't. Night after painstaking night. Tonight dawned ordinary. Clocked in at 3. Retrieved my trolley of chemicals and cloths from the subterranean storeroom. Commenced the ascent. Ground floor up. 2 levels of dormant commerce per floor. Cubicle farms hushed. Conference chambers vacant. Break rooms stilled. The vacuum winds, bins disgorge their daily waste. Porcelain gleams under my rag. Surfaces shed their daytime grime. A mindless rhythm, usually a balm. By 6, the exodus is complete. 7 finds me adrift in the fluorescent hum. The building breathing around me. Solitude, my usual companion. Then, 9:47 p.m. 19 floors above the street, swab gliding across linoleum, I hear it. Thump, thump, thump. Slow, weighted steps overhead. They track from the tower's southern parapet towards the north. My grip tightens, knuckles wide on the mop handle. Directly above me now, the steps cease. Stillness descends, absolute save for the frantic drummer behind my ribs. I hold my breath, a statue carved from sudden dread. 1 minute bleeds into 2. Then the pacing resumes. Quicker now, agitated. Back and forth, back and forth. Cold perspiration snakes down my spine, dampening the fabric of my uniform. Ascend. Confront. The thought hammers against my fear. Just climb the stairwell to the 20th, turn the keys, face the intruder, but my feet are rooted, anchors sunk deep in the floor. 5 more minutes the spectral footfalls echo, then silence rushes back, thick and suffocating, punctuated only by the slow drip from my mop into the bucket. My own ragged exhalations. With trembling hands, I wring the mop one last time, forcing motion back into my limbs. 10:15 p.m. The service elevator sighs me upward to the final floor. Darkness reigns in the corridor, pierced by the crimson glow of exit signs. My flashlight beam cuts a swath through the gloom towards the roof access. The deadbolt remains shot home. The padlock gleams untouched. I press my ear to the cold steel portal. Listen. Only the city's distant murmur answers. Key grates in the deadbolt. Tumblers yield. The padlock clicks open. I ease the heavy door inward. A breath of cool night air greets me. Gravel crunches underfoot as I emerge onto the roof. My light sweeps the barren expanse. Long shadows stretch from the air-conditioning monoliths. Below, the city sprawls, a glittering circuitry of gold and white. Vacant. But there, nestled near the northern precipice, 3 cigarette butts, Marlboro Reds, freshly discarded, warm to the touch. I bag them, another futile offering of proof for a supervisor who won't see. Straightening, my beam catches it. A distinct scuff mark marring the stone ledge, precisely where someone might sit, legs dangling over the abyss. Bile rises in my throat. I recoil from the edge, scrambling back towards the door. Lock the deadbolt, snap the padlock shut, check them again and again. My remaining tasks blur in a panicked rush, propelled by an urgent need to flee this place. Yet the questions echo. The footsteps, the cigarettes, that chilling mark 20 stories high. The next day arrives bathed in unwelcome sunlight. I bypass my usual start, heading directly for the basement archives. The building blueprints, brittle and yellowed with age, unfurl across my breakroom table. I trace the lines, seeking anomalies. The main roof door, my familiar adversary, a secondary access noted as permanently sealed during the 2012 renovations. And then, my eyes strain against the faded ink, an archaic maintenance hatch charted in the northwest corner. Obsolete, supposedly entombed beneath the modern HVAC installation. Lunch hour finds me back on the roof, probing the perimeter of the largest cooling unit. And there it is, a subtle discrepancy, a narrow fissure between the unit's plinth and the roof membrane. Conceivable, perhaps, for someone sufficiently motivated, sufficiently slender to wriggle through. But the notion feels insane. Who would undertake such contortions merely for rooftop smoke? An idea forms, crude but necessary. A trap. Nothing perilous, just a length of fishing line stretched taut across the suspected gap, anchored at one end, tied to an empty soda can at the other. Intrusion would trigger a clatter, an alarm audible on the floor below. A week drifts by uneventfully. No steps disturb the quiet. No crimson-tipped filters appear. The can remains steadfastly upright. A fragile ease settles over me. Perhaps the phantom found a new haunt. Perhaps fatigue had conjured the entire affair. Then came last night. I was scrubbing sinks on the 20th floor, the scent of bleach sharp in the air, when the distinct metallic clatter erupted from the roof above. My heart seized. Flashlight clenched. I bolted for the stairs, taking them two at a time, adrenaline surging. The access door stood impassive, locked solid. My hand quaked violently, fumbling the key, scraping metal against metal. Finally, the lock yielded. I threw the door open, flashlight beam stabbing into the darkness. It caught a figure, crouched low by the hulking AC unit. It turned, just a flicker, and I saw its face. Or rather, the place where a face should have been. Only an abyss stared back, a swallowing nullity where features ought to bloom. Then, impossibly, it folded itself into the narrow gap beneath the machinery and vanished. Back inside, door slammed, bolts thrown, I dialed the police. 20 minutes later, their flashlights scanned the empty roof. Nothing. No cigarettes this time. No footprints disturbed the gravel. Only my severed fishing line lay scattered, the empty can resting innocently against the parapet. Call building security next time, they advised. Building security deferred to my supervisor. My supervisor suggested I take a few days off, implied I needed rest. But retreat isn't an option. This job, this quiet life, it's mine. And deeper still, a non-imperative, to understand what haunts the Harborview Tower's heights. So I wait. Here, in the sterile quiet of the break room, 3:00 a.m. ticking closer, this account committed to paper. Tonight, I came prepared. A small camera watches the HVAC unit, triggered by motion. A voice recorder lies buried beneath a thin layer of gravel near the gap. 10 minutes ago, they began again, the footsteps, but altered. Lighter now, possessed of an almost playful quality, as if my unseen visitor knows I'm listening, knows I'm waiting. I should investigate, The roof door is merely 50 feet down the corridor. My flashlight rests heavy in my hand. Phone charged, camera recording. Evidence. That's the key. Proof to anchor my sanity. Yet my limbs are leaden. My throat constricts, dry as dust. The footsteps draw nearer to the access door. Slower now, measured, deliberate. A faint scraping sound vibrates through the floor. Metal on metal. Once, twice. The handle on my side of the door begins, impossibly, to turn. I know with chilling certainty that I locked it. I always lock it. But the handle rotates, slow, inexorable, and beneath the door, shadows pool, lengthening, seeping. They come through the walls. They always came through the walls. I should have checked the walls. The wind, a famished beast, keened against the glass panes, making the timbers of Alara's refuge tremble. She drew the woolen throw closer, a futile gesture against the spectral chill blooming not from the night air, but from within her own mind. This sanctuary, chosen for its profound remoteness, a pinprick of existence swallowed by leagues of forest, was meant to be a crucible for creativity, a quiet space to wrestle her novel into submission. Yet solitude had soured, curdling into something isolated, menacing. Deep within the woods, miles separating her from any other soul, the cabin's isolation now felt less like liberation and more like a tightening snare. Even the hearth's frantic pulse of firelight failed to banish the cold that had sunk deep into her marrow. It began subtly. The scrape of skeletal branches on the shingled roof, floorboards groaning under phantom weight. Typical complaints of an old structure, she reasoned. Vestiges of wind and settling wood. But the night deepened, and the sounds acquired a disturbing cadence, a deliberate weight. Alara was cocooned on the worn sofa, her laptop a warm island on her lap, trying to submerge herself in fictional worlds when the rhythm intruded. A crisp, distinct crunch, crunch, crunch of decaying leaves underfoot, tracing a perimeter around the cabin. Her fingers went still above the keys, breath snagged in her throat. Only a deer, she whispered into the charged silence, the words evaporating instantly, hollow. Animals don't pace with such methodical intent, such unnerving purpose. Setting the laptop aside with infinite care, she moved towards the window, a silken glide born of sudden fear. Her heart hammered a frantic tattoo against her ribs, loud enough, surely, to betray her presence. She eased the heavy curtain back, a mere sliver, and squinted into the consuming dark. Nothing but the Stygian void where trees stood like silent sentinels. Then, a flicker at the edge of vision. A shape, denser than the surrounding blackness, detached itself from the tree line. Alara blinked, convinced her strained nerves were conjuring phantoms. But no, another form materialized beside the first, and then a third. A glacial wave washed through her veins. Not phantoms, figures. Several umbral silhouettes standing utterly motionless amongst the ancient trunks, their collective gaze fixed unerringly upon her small, lighted box. Watching, waiting. The curtain fell back, muffling the view but not the terror blooming in her chest. Who? Why? Her trembling fingers sought her mobile phone, a useless brick in this signal dead zone, a fact she cursed now with breathless intensity. The landline, an archaic rotary dial phone, incongruous on the rustic kitchen counter. She navigated the shadowed space on legs turned to water, staying low, avoiding the accusing rectangles of the windows. Lifting the heavy receiver, she pressed it to her ear, praying for the mundane miracle of a dial tone. Utter silence greeted her. Dead as her hope of summoning aid. A choked sob, sharp with frustration and sheer terror, escaped her lips. The cabin, her chosen haven, warped into a cage, she the cornered animal await the inevitable. A sharp thump resonated from outside, startlingly close. They were advancing. Low murmurs now drifted on the wind, indistinct but undeniably human. Her gaze darted frantically around the kitchen, searching for a weapon, any advantage. It snagged on the butcher's block. She sees the largest knife, its cold heft alien and dreadful in her palm. Violence was a language she didn't speak, conflict a country she'd never visited. Yet, facing the unknown encroaching, a primal instinct surged. Survive. Another thud, this time at the front door. They were testing it. She flattened herself against the wall beside the kitchen entryway, the knife clutched tight, her breathing a ragged storm she fought to quell. The doorknob rattled once, twice, then stillness. A fragile seed of hope dared to sprout. Perhaps they'd retreated, shattered instantly by the unmistakable sound of shattering glass. A window breached. They were coming inside. Panic clawed at her throat, threatening to paralyze. Cornered here, she was lost. Movement was imperative. An escape route, the back door. If she could reach it, melt into the concealing woods. She began to edge along the wall, each footfall a potential betrayal on the complaining floorboards. Their whispers echoed now from within the cabin's main room. Just as her hand closed around the knob of the rear door, a board beneath her cried out. A long, agonized groan. The whispers ceased. Silence descended, absolute and terrifying. They knew. Stealth was a luxury forfeit. She wrenched the door open and flung herself into the night, the frigid air a brutal slap. She ran, heedless, branches lashing her face like angry whips, unseen roots conspiring to trip her. Behind, shouts erupted, the crashing sounds of pursuit through dense undergrowth. They were given chase. The forest, serene by daylight, transformed into a labyrinth of grasping shadows and unseen pitfalls. She ran until her lungs burned, each inhalation searing her chest. But the sounds of pursuit persisted, drawn inexorably closer. Risking a backward glance, a mistake, she saw them. Multiple figures, dark shapes merging and separating from the trees, relentless. Her foot snagged, momentum betrayed her. She pitched forward, landing hard, the taste of earth and damp leaves flooding her mouth. The knife spun from her grasp, swallowed by the darkness and the ferns. Scrabbling upright was futile. They were on her. Rough hands seized her arms, spinning her around. She fought back blindly, fists striking something solid, rewarded by a grunt of pain. More hands pinned her, immobilizing her struggles. Enough! The voice was deep, resonant with authority. We mean you no harm. She ceased struggling, less from compliance than sheer astonishment. What do you want? The question emerged as a ragged gasp. A beat of silence, Then the scrape and flare of a match. The small flame danced, illuminating the face of the man holding her, ordinary features thrown into stark, unsettling relief by the flickering light. Not the monster her fear had painted. "Your assistance," he stated, his gaze intense, unwavering. "There is something coming, a great darkness, and you are the only one who can prevent it." Alara stared, certain the wind or her own terror had twisted his words. "What? I don't... Who are you?" The man sighed, pinching out the flame, plunging them back into profound darkness. His voice seemed disembodied, emanating from the night itself. "We are the keepers of this wild place. Generations of us have watched over it, shielded it from encroachments both mundane and otherwise." A woman's voice, calmer, joined his. "A shadow lengthens Ilara, a corruption that threatens more than just these trees, but the fabric of all things. Our foresight shows it creeping closer, day by inexorable day. And you believe I can stop it?" Incredulity roughened her voice. "I'm a novelist. I came here for solitude, to finish a book, not to avert some apocalypse." A dry chuckle sounded from somewhere to her left. Providence often deposits the necessary soul in the precise place at the opportune moment. That novel you wrestle with, its importance transcends your current understanding. Her mind whirled, rejecting the impossibility. A hoax? A stress-induced delusion? "This is insane," she breathed. Yet, beneath the denial, a strange resonance stirred, a flicker of recognition, destiny. The first man, Kalen, spoke again, his tone softening. "We understand this is overwhelming. Our methods were harsh, born of necessity. We had to be certain before revealing ourselves. Will you grant us the courtesy of explaining? Allow us to lay bare the truth?" She stood frozen, encircled by strangers in the vast, breathing darkness, every nerve ending screaming, "Flee!" But counterbalancing the fear was a burgeoning curiosity, an unexpected sense of gravity. What if it wasn't madness? What if this terrifying night held the key to something profound? After a silence that stretched taut as a bowstring, she nodded, her voice gaining a surprising firmness. "All right, I'll listen. But if this turns into some bizarre cult recruitment..." A ripple of relieved amusement passed through the unseen group, easing the suffocating tension. Flashlights blinked on, their beams cutting comforting paths through the dark as they guided her back toward the cabin. A profound certainty settled over Alara. Her life had just pivoted on an unseen axis. The manuscript waiting on her laptop suddenly felt profoundly diminished, a mere prologue to the narrative now unfolding around her. Stepping back into the warm, lamp-lit embrace of the cabin, she drew a steadying breath, bracing for the revelations to come. Little could she fathom that this night marked only the threshold of a journey poised to unravel her perception of reality itself. The shadows that had moments ago embodied pure terror now hinted at ancient secrets and veiled truths. As she settled to hear the guardian's tale, Ilara sensed that the most frightening encounters often hold the greatest power for transformation. Surrounded by these enigmatic protectors of the wild, she felt inexplicably ready. The chill of that government edifice seeped into my bones long before I descended. I'd presented myself at dawn's first light, nursing the naive hope of swift orientation. Outwardly, it was unremarkable. A monolith of gray stone, tiered floors punctuated by tall, impassive windows. Yet whispers circulated about the subterranean warren beneath, passages rumored to snake for hundreds of feet into the earth. My assignment, I was told, lay primarily within this underworld, sifting through archives thick with the dust of ages, imposing order on forgotten repositories. I affected nonchalance. Dank basements were familiar territory. I anticipated the usual companions of poor illumination, stagnant air, perhaps the scuttling of unseen life. The sheer depth of those tunnels, however, the profound absence of light, these truths remained veiled. My first port of call was a cramped office just inside the main entrance. A functionary named Mr. Finch, all sharp angles and muted tones, furnished me with a manifest of containers requiring location, documentation, and subsequent reorganization. He unfurled a brittle schematic of the lower levels, a grid of shelving units, sequestered storage chambers, and a primary corridor encircling several heavily secured vaults. Along with the map, he pressed a weighty ring of keys and a diminutive torch into my hand. Its beam seemed pitifully inadequate. "Spare batteries?" I inquired. A negative shake of his head. "Supply cupboard near the lift, basement level, should you require sundries." He gestured towards the door accessing the main stairwell. With murmured thanks, I set off. The stairwell exhaled the scent of perpetually damp concrete. Each footfall resonated, amplified in the narrow space, while overhead, fluorescent tubes sputtered erratically. By the time I reached the basement landing, a clammy moisture had already gathered on my palms. The atmosphere was oppressive, thick as felt, suggesting a complete lack of circulation. Sporadic, dim bulbs punctuated the gloom, though most appeared lifeless. I thumbed my torch alive, its weak cone slicing through the murk. Rows of antiquated filing cabinets lined the passage, some scarred by missing drawers, others fused shut by rust. The walls bore the dark stigmata of chronic water seepage, and the concrete floor buckled and cracked in places. From somewhere indistinct, the faint, rhythmic plink, plink of water finding its way through the ceiling echoed. Consulting the schematic, I navigated towards a broad corridor that opened into a larger chamber dominated by towering metal racks. These shelves groaned under the weight of bygone folders, brittle ledgers, bound volumes, and haphazard bundles of documents secured with fraying twine. I deposited my satchel, containing my personal notepad, pen, and the cataloging binder, and located the switch for the section's solitary overhead light. It flickered, hesitated, then grudgingly cast a sickly, yellow luminescence across the stacks. Dust motes danced languidly in the stagnant air. Each inhalation felt dense, tainted with the unmistakable taste of mold. Methodically, I began my task, prying open the initial cartons. Their labels were faded specters of ink, demanding the focused beam of my torch to decipher the spidery script. I transcribed reference codes and titles onto my notepad. Initially, the contents were prosaic. Decades-old property deeds, expired permits. Yet, progressing to an adjacent row, I unearthed a file detailing recurrent repairs necessitated within the sub-basement structure. It spoke of inherent weaknesses compounded by anecdotal reports of inexplicable noises emanating from the deeper levels. Old building settling, I reasoned, the groans of stressed metal, the thermal sighs of plumbing. Nothing extraordinary. After perhaps 2 hours immersed in the musty silence, a restless curiosity prompted exploration. I extinguished the overhead bulb to conserve its feeble life, relying solely on my torch. The quiet down here was absolute, a tangible pressure that seemed to squeeze the air from my lungs. My own respiration sounded unnaturally loud. Then another sound intruded. Slow, deliberate footsteps. My first assumption was another soul. Maintenance, perhaps, or security. But the steps didn't approach. They seemed to recede, then trace a circling path, their source distorted by the echoing acoustics. I froze, listening intently, heart thudding against my ribs. The sound eventually dissolved into the profound silence. No one appeared. Just the old building settling, I told myself again, or the echo of my own movements playing tricks. The following day, I returned armed with a more substantial torch brought from home and donned a light jacket against the pervasive subterranean damp. No sooner had I rounded the corner into the main corridor than I observed them. Fresh impressions in the thick dust coating the floor. Partial prints, suggestive of a heavy boot or work shoe. A solitary set leading deeper into the labyrinth. Intrigued, I traced their path for several yards until they abruptly ceased where the concrete was less dusty. I shook my head, perplexed. A single trail inwards with no corresponding return? It defied logic. Shrugging off the anomaly, I forced my attention back to the catalog. Nearby, I discovered an old wooden desk, its drawers yielding a small cache of reports spanning various years. Each document touched upon personnel assigned to sub-basement duties, inventory, repairs. Several pages bore marginalia hinting at unexplained disappearances. Not fatalities, simply absences. Employees who clocked in but never clocked out. One chilling account mentioned a worker leaving a half-eaten sandwich in the break area, never to reclaim it. Another described a supervisor meticulously locking up one evening, only to vanish by morning. His keys discovered lying forlornly on the floor. The script on that particular note was tremulous, culminating in a stark reference to a hooded figure sighted near the tunnel entrances. A frisson of unease traced its way down my spine, despite the muggy air. I carefully set the reports aside. Following a brief respite, I ventured towards the basement's furthest reaches, where the most ancient records slumbered. The corridor here plunged into deeper shadow, the ceiling weeping moisture that splattered onto the floor below. I attempted to move quietly, yet every slight sound seemed magnified, reverberating unnervingly in the darkness. The beam from my torch wavered, betraying the tension knot in my hands. The pervasive sense of unease intensified, a visceral reaction to the place itself. I located a door marked Archive Chamber Delta. Pushing it open released an odor of profound mustiness overlaid with something else. A faint, dry scent like decaying leather. A few cartons huddled in one corner. Against the far wall stood a stark metal cabinet. A sudden, faint scuffling noise broke the silence. My light darted across the floor, catching a glimpse of a rat vanishing through a fissure in the wall. I released a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The remainder of the afternoon was consumed by the methodical sorting and tagging of boxes, meticulously recording their contents. Yet the tension remained, coiling tighter in my shoulders. Periodically, I'd pause, straining my ears. Sometimes a soft scraping sound, like a shoe being dragged hesitantly across concrete. At other times, what seemed tantalizingly like a sibilant whisper, always just beyond the edge of perception. Each time I swept my torch beam towards the suspected source, I found only weeping walls and silent stacks of files. Perspiration glued my shirt to my back. My throat felt parched. I hadn't brought sufficient water. I resolved to conclude my work earlier than intended. On the third day, I opted for the elevator, hoping perhaps for the incidental company of another human being. The lift descended with agonizing slowness, its doors groaning open to release a gust of stale air. I proceeded down the familiar corridor, turned right, and noticed a flickering illumination emanating from the far end. Approaching cautiously, I identified a small maintenance alcove, a single bare bulb dangling from the ceiling, casting erratic shadows. A squeaky utility cart laden with cleaning supplies stood near the entrance, unattended. A half-filled bucket of murky water rested upon it. "Hello?" My voice echoed, swallowed by the immensity. Silence answered. No note, no sign of a janitor. The cart appeared recently used, yet the surrounding dust lay undisturbed save for a few random scuffs. No footprints. Resuming my archival duties around midday, I uncovered another sheaf of documents pertaining to the sub-basement. These were older still, typewritten reports detailing expansions of the tunnel network. One sentence alluded cryptically to concealed passages linking disparate wings of the building. Another included a rudimentary diagram dated from the 1920s. A prickling sensation crawled over my skin, the feeling of stumbling upon secrets best left buried. The deeper I read, the more frequent the references became to a recurring apparition. A hooded figure materializing unpredictably, invariably near the deeper, less trafficked corridors. Employee accounts spoke of an unnerving sensation of being watched. One stark line commanded, "Do not speak of what you have witnessed. Consign it to the darkness." My stomach clenched. I slipped the papers into a folder within my satchel, intending to consult Mr. Finch, yet simultaneously possessed by an urgent need to understand more. By the fourth day, the pervasive odors and abysmal lighting had become almost familiar, yet the sensation of unseen observation intensified. It clung to me like the damp air. Rounding any corner now carried the heavy expectation of confronting a lurking shadow, a waiting form. My nerves felt abraded, raw. The slightest sound, a drip, a settling groan, sent jolts of adrenaline through my system. I reasoned with myself it was merely an old, unnerving basement, but the reassurances rang hollow. The footsteps became a near-constant companion, intermittent, circling. Sometimes they sounded disturbingly close, prompting me to spin around, torch held high like a weapon, only to illuminate empty, silent corridors. That afternoon, compelled by a morbid curiosity, I pushed deeper into the tunnels than before. The corridor stretched onwards, flanked by defunct, rust-streaked light fixtures. My torch beam picked out patches of slick moisture and blooms of greenish mold upon the walls. The air grew heavier, more stagnant. I encountered a formidable locked steel door bearing an antique plaque. Archive Secure Vault. My keys proved useless against it. Moving on, I detected a subtle draft, its origin elusive. The corridor bifurcated, a deviation absent from my schematic. I chose the right-hand path. Here, the walls grew rougher, less finished, suggesting a transition from constructed passage to something more primal, almost cave-like. Then the footsteps returned, steady, unhurried, mirroring my own cadence. I stopped. They stopped. A knot formed in my gut. Is anyone there? My voice, thin and reedy, was absorbed by the oppressive silence, punctuated only by the incessant dripping. No response. I took a tentative step forward. The footsteps resumed, seemingly just behind me, perhaps 10, 15 feet distant. Whirling around revealed nothing but empty, shadow-drenched space. My hands began to tremble. My breathing grew shallow, rapid. My pulse throbbed painfully in my temples. I pressed onward, sweeping the torch beam erratically across the walls, searching desperately for an alcove, any recess to offer sanctuary. A small, dark doorway appeared on my left. I slipped inside, pressing myself flat against the cold stone. The footsteps continued past my hiding place, unwavering. A wave of paradoxical relief washed over me, immediately followed by a fresh surge of dread. It had passed me by. After a long minute, heart hammering, I cautiously emerged back into the corridor. The passage eventually terminated at another flight of steps, descending further into the earth. The old reports had hinted at a lower level, though its existence remained unconfirmed in recent memory. I directed my lot downwards. The stone steps were ancient, worn smooth by time and water, fractured in places. An instinct screamed against descending further, yet the pull of the unknown was irresistible. I descended carefully, each step echoing unnaturally, amplifying my presence. At the bottom, the corridor veered sharply left. The air here felt distinctly colder, a stark contrast to the mugginess above. Ahead, around the bend, a faint, unsteady light flickered. I advanced slowly, hugging the damp wall, my heart constricting painfully in my chest. Rounding the corner, I beheld a soft glow emanating from a wide archway. It opened into what appeared to be an antiquated storeroom, shelves laden with indeterminate shapes lining the walls. Upon a rough wooden crate sat a single lantern, its small flame sputtering fitfully. The lantern itself looked ancient. Keeping my torch aimed forward, I edged closer. A soft, shuffling sound whispered directly behind me. I spun, torch beam slashing through the gloom. There, standing no more than 6 feet away, a figure shrouded in a dark, heavy hood. Its face was entirely obscured by a shadow. It remained perfectly still, utterly silent, a sentinel barring my retreat. My throat constricted, sealing off any sound. My muscles locked, rigid with terror. 1,000 frantic questions collided in my mind. Security? An intruder? Something else? I raised my torch higher, attempting to penetrate the cowl's darkness. The figure retreated a single step, the faintest scrape of a shoe sole on stone reaching my ears. I struggled to speak, the words catching like burrs. Finally, a choked whisper escaped. "Who are you?" Silence answered. The figure maintained its unnerving stillness. Inch by painstaking inch, I backed away, eyes riveted to the motionless form. My torch flickered, threatening to die. I rapped it sharply against my palm. The beam steadied, momentarily brighter. In that instant, the figure vanished. Simply gone. The corridor stretched empty behind me. No sound of retreat, no fading footsteps. I swept the beam frantically across the spot where it had stood. Nothing. My heart hammered violently, dizziness washing over me. Turning back towards the storeroom, I impulsively reached for the lantern on the crate, only to find its fuel all but spent. It sputtered once more, then dimmed almost to extinction. I replaced it carefully. The air in the room was thick with the scent of old wax and damp, decaying wood. Enough. It was unequivocally time to depart. I turned and fled back the way I had come, my footsteps pounding recklessly on the stone, heedless of the noise. The pursuing footsteps immediately recommenced, shadowing my frantic retreat, but I refused to look back. My skin crawled with the certainty of imminent presence, something vast and unseen breathing down my neck. I reached the stairs, scrambled up them 2 at a time, and burst onto the upper basement level, bolting towards the elevator shaft. I stabbed repeatedly at the call button, casting panicked glances over my shoulder every few seconds. The corridor remained vacant. The lift's arrival felt agonizingly slow, the overhead light inside flickering menacingly as the doors groaned open. I stumbled inside, slammed the button for the ground floor, and leaned against the cool metal wall, gasping for breath. As the car ascended, the events replayed in a chaotic loop. The solitary footprints, the chilling reports of vanishings, the hooded sentinel in the depths. A wave of profound anxiety crested, yet beneath it stirred an insistent, undeniable curiosity about the secrets still entombed within those archives. Something resided in that subterranean darkness, something that guarded its history jealously. I felt scrutinized, tested. When the doors finally opened onto the ground floor, I emerged into the jarring normalcy of the upper world, feeling utterly dislocated. The corridor here was brightly illuminated. The distant sounds of office life, conversations, ringing telephones felt alien. Relief warred with the adrenaline still coursing through my veins. My shirt, I realized, was soaked through with cold sweat. I made my way directly to Mr. Finch's office, laying out a few of the more disturbing documents, those mentioning the hooded figure. I asked him point blank if he knew anything. His expression shuddered instantly. He shook his head, his gaze skittering away from mine. I'd be wise, he advised coolly, to confine myself to the parameters of my assignment. The sub-basement was old, he murmured, prone to generating rumors. People imagined things, he stated flatly. Just catalog the boxes, Elias. Best not to stir things up. I nodded mutely, but his dismissal solidified my resolve. A deep wrongness permeated that place, an enigma demanding investigation. Despite the bone-deep fear, I knew, even then, that I would descend again the following day. Those files, those tunnels, held answers I now felt compelled to unearth. Sleep offered little respite that night. Each time my eyelids drifted shut, The image of the hooded figure materialized in the darkness behind them, jolting me awake, heart pounding, throat raw. My muscles ached from the tension and the flight. I twisted in the sheets, grappling with the urge to abandon the job entirely, yet tethered by an insatiable need to know. The next morning, I returned, steeling myself. My satchel was heavier now, fortified with fresh batteries, my larger torch, and even a small handheld radio, a hopeful, perhaps futile, hedge against the isolation. Stepping out of the lift onto the basement level, the familiar oppressive weight of the air settled upon me. Taking a deep, steadying breath, I switched on my light and started walking. My intention was simple: finish cataloging the main archives, retrieve any pertinent records, and withdraw. But the shadowed mouths of the side tunnels seemed to beckon, whispering silent invitations. And almost immediately they began. The footsteps, slow, rhythmic, echoing relentlessly through the damp, silent corridors. I pressed forward, the frantic beat of my own pulse loud in my ears. Uncertain of what awaited me, I was acutely aware of one thing. I was not alone down there. And somewhere in the labyrinthine dark, the figure waited, watching, perhaps hoping I would finally read what I was never meant to discover. A shriek of tortured steel ripped through the subterranean passage, the subway car juddering to a halt so violent it felt like a seizure. Fluorescent tubes overhead buzzed, flickered, painting the few faces scattered through the carriage in stark, fleeting geometries of light and shadow. A cold current, unrelated to the tunnel's draft, traced its way down Alara Vance's spine as she scanned the near-desolate car. He was here. The man whose presence had shadowed her periphery for a week. A persistent, unnerving echo in her daily rhythm. His obsidian gaze found hers across the echoing space. Trapped. Miles of earth and wire above, no escape below. Alara Vance. Until 7 days prior, merely another anonymous particle drifting through the vast urban nebula of New York. 28, a digital compositor who'd traded the quiet expanse of prairie skies for the city's towering ambitions. Now, pinned to the worn vinyl seat, a terrifying question bloomed. Would those very ambitions become her epitaph? It began the previous Tuesday. Lost in the intricate layers of a looming project deadline during her morning descent into the city's veins, she'd felt it exiting the train, a prickling awareness of being observed. In this metropolis, you cultivated such instincts like rare, necessary orchids. A quick glance over her shoulder snared him. A man, watching, intently, strikingly unremarkable. Medium build, hair the color of old coffee grounds, clothes devoid of statement. Yet the sheer weight of his stare felt invasive, crawling beneath her skin. City strangeness, she'd told herself, dismissing the tremor. But Wednesday morning, there he was. And Thursday. Friday, too. A fixture on her train, his gaze a silent, unwavering sentinel. She experimented, altering departure times, switching platforms, weaving different routes through the labyrinthine stations. Futile. He materialized regardless, a constant presence flickering at the edge of her vision. Never beyond the subway's threshold. Yet, the moment she stepped onto a platform, her pulse would begin its frantic drum solo until she located him. A perverse choreography where she was perpetually discovered. The police? What concrete accusation could she offer? A man shares my commute. He looks at me. Nothing tangible, only this corrosive certainty churning in her gut, growing heavier with each passing sunrise. Which led to this night. She'd lingered late at the studio, a deliberate attempt to sidestep the usual train, the usual dread. Entering the sparsely populated car, her stomach had plummeted. He sat there, placid, as if holding court in a predetermined theater. She chose a seat diagonally opposite, the cold surface of her phone slick beneath her palm, emergency services pre-selected. 2 stations crawled by in a silence thick with unspoken tension before the train's convulsive stop. Now, as phantom shapes writhed in the flickering emergency lights, he rose. His movement held an unsettling fluidity, a quiet grace that belied the week of silent pursuit. He advanced down the aisle. The handful of other souls aboard remained cocooned in their own worlds, screens glowing, heads lolling against vibrating windows utterly oblivious. "Hello, Ilara," he murmured, his voice quieter than she'd expected, possessed of an odd resonance. "I believe a conversation is overdue." Her breath hitched. Ilara. How? No word had passed between them, not even a shared glance acknowledged across the void of the week. "Who are you?" The question emerged as a dry rasp, her thumb trembling over the call icon. "What is it you want?" A smile touched his lips but failed to ignite his eyes. They remained glacial, analytical. "My identity is inconsequential. What matters is yours, Ilara. More precisely, what you are poised to become." A choked, near hysterical sound caught in her throat. This wasn't real. Surely she'd blink and find herself tangled in bedsheets, this entire week dissolving into nightmare's residue. But the chill bite of the seat, the acrid tang drifting from the tunnel, the undeniable solidity of the man before her, it was all crushingly, terrifyingly present. "I don't understand," she whispered, hating the fragile sound of her own voice. He settled onto the seat facing hers, leaning in, elbows resting on his knees. "Naturally, not yet, but enlightenment comes. You possess something rare, Ilara, a potential you haven't begun to comprehend." She shook her head, a maelstrom of fear and confusion warring within. "I'm not special. Please, just leave me alone." His gaze hardened, flint striking steel. "That decision isn't yours to make. We have observed you for a significant time. We are aware of your capabilities." "We." Her eyes darted around the carriage, a sudden, chilling conviction forming. The other passengers, they were part of this, a staged tableau. But their disinterest remained absolute, impenetrable. "Indeed, we," he affirmed. "Our numbers surpass your imagining, Ilara. We have steered humanity's course from the shadows across millennia. Now, your time has arrived. Your turn to join the ranks." She surged to her feet, shedding any concern for appearing unhinged. "I don't know what you're talking about, and I don't care to. Stay away from me." Alara moved to sidestep him, ready to hammer on the operator's compartment door to scream until her lungs burned. As she tried to pass, his hand shot out, fingers closing around her wrist with the strength that felt utterly alien, forged of something denser than bone and muscle. "You lack a choice in this, Ilara," he stated, his voice maintaining its calm veneer, yet underscored with an unyielding metallic edge. "The metamorphosis has commenced. Surely you've felt the alterations." She struggled against his grip, immovable as stone. "Alterations? Let me go." Even as the denial left her lips, recognition dawned. The splitting headaches that had plagued her all week, the unsettlingly vivid dreams, those fleeting moments where stray thoughts, not her own, seemed to whisper at the edges of her hearing. "Precisely," he confirmed, his tone suggesting he'd plucked the thoughts directly from her mind. Perhaps he had. "Your inherent gifts are surfacing. Uncontrolled, they become perilous. You require tutelage, structure. Without us, you risk fragmentation. Believe me, that is an outcome you wish to avoid." The carriage lights gave another convulsive flicker, then plunged into absolute darkness. In the sudden void, the very air around them seemed to shift, crackling with unseen energy, thick and electric. And then she saw. Not with her eyes, but with something deeper. The fragmented anxieties and mundane concerns of the other passengers flooded her consciousness like cool water. The intricate, hidden machinery of the stalled train unfolded before her inner sight, a luminous, three-dimensional schematic. And the man whose grip still held her, she perceived his true nature. Not human, not remotely. Recoiling violently, she wrenched her arm free with a surge of strength she hadn't known she possessed. "What are you?" she gasped into the blackness. In the dark, his eyes ignited, glowing softly with an internal luminescence. "We are the Watchers, Ilara, custodians of human evolution, and you are its next iteration." With a sudden lurch, the train shuddered back to life, the lights sputtering on, harsh and ordinary, as if dispelling an enchantment. The world snapped back into its familiar focus. Murmurs of complaint rose from the roused passengers. The man, the Watcher, stood. "This is merely the beginning, Alara. Expect contact." And then, he was simply not there. Not vanished through a door, nor retreated down the aisle. Between one heartbeat and the next, he ceased to occupy the space. The train resumed its journey. Alara collapsed back onto the seat, her thoughts a chaotic whirlwind. What just transpired? What was happening to her? As the train slid into the next station, she stumbled out onto the platform, drawing the stale, subterranean air into her lungs, as if it were alpine purity. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. Trembling fingers retrieved it. A message from an unknown sender. "Welcome to the truth, Alara. Your instruction commences tomorrow." She stared at the glowing screen, terror and a strange, nascent excitement warring within her veins. One part screamed to flee, to burrow back into anonymity, to pretend this fissure in reality hadn't opened. But a larger, more resonant part, a self stirring from a long dormancy, felt an undeniable pull, curiosity, perhaps even eagerness. Ascending the stairs to the street, the city itself felt altered, sharper, pulsating with an intensity she'd never perceived. She could almost feel the thrum of millions of lives intertwined, a vast, complex symphony of thought and feeling previously unheard. Ilara tilted her head back, searching the sliver of night sky wedged between towering structures, obscured by the city's perpetual glow. Somewhere beyond the haze, she sensed them, the watchers, observing, waiting. A decision lay before her. Reject this emergent power, flee the enigmatic beings who heralded it, or step forward, embrace a reality far stranger and more profound than she had ever conceived. Walking the final blocks toward her apartment, mind ablaze with impossible possibilities, she understood the choice was already an illusion. There could be no return to the Ilara Vance of yesterday, to the comforting confines of the known world. For good or ill, her trajectory had irrevocably shifted. And somewhere, concealed within the city's intricate shadows, she felt certain the watchers were smiling. A wrongness greeted Elias the moment he crossed the threshold into his living room that morning. Dust motes danced in the weak light filtering through plastic-shrouded furniture, remnants of the renovation scarring the walls. But beneath the scent of plaster and paint lingered an unfamiliar cold, sharp against his skin. Mr. Volkov, the hired hand, stood near the far wall, his weathered face turned towards it. He beckoned Elias closer, his gesture tight. There, interrupting the scarred plaster, gaped a perfect circle, no larger than a fist. It hadn't existed yesterday. No architect had ever dreamt it onto a blueprint. An aberration. Its perimeter wasn't merely broken, it was gnawed, as if the very substance of the wall had decided to sprout a maw in the quiet hours. Elias swallowed, masking the unease prickling his scalp. Beside him, Volkov, a man whose hands spoke of labor and whose eyes held the flat calm of decades, merely grunted. Never laid eyes on the like, he stated, his voice gravelly. Patch it come morning. A simple declaration. Elias offered a curt nod, lacking any words to counter such certainty. Yet, a dissonant chord hummed beneath his ribs. Drawn despite himself, he approached the aperture. His palm, pressed flat against the surrounding plaster, registered a distinct chill radiating outwards, a pocket of unnatural cold. Just a draft, he rationalized, a quirk of the old building. Volkov, efficient, slapped a wide strip of painter's tape over the opening, a flimsy bandage on a wound Elias couldn't comprehend. Sorted, the older man declared, already gathering his tools. Volkov departed, leaving Elias adrift in the disarray of his half-gutted apartment. Evening bled into night, the space shrinking under the weight of shadows. He navigated the obstacle course of paint tins and ladders, finally sinking into the dust-sheeted sofa. With 2 bulbs removed for the renovation, the living room swam in gloom, punctuated by the erratic pulse of a street lamp outside, sending phantom shapes skittering across the stripped walls. The television offered a flickering distraction, but silence, when he finally killed the screen, rushed in like a tide, and with it a whisper, faint at first, like air sighing through a keyhole. Elias held his breath, straining. Nothing. Then, clearer, unmistakable, a susurration that coiled around the shape of his own name. A jolt, cold and sharp, shot through Elias. His pulse hammered against his ribs, his gaze locked onto the taped-over circle on the far wall. Was it imagination, or did the tape seem less taut, as if pressured subtly from within? He rose, compelled, crossing the shadowed room. He pressed his ear to the wall, the cool plaster a shock. Silence then, breathing, slow, deliberate, heavy, impossible. He tried to rationalize, settling foundations, wind, his own frayed nerves from the renovation chaos. But then, the sound reformed, clearer this time, shaping his name like a desperate secret. Elias. A plea whispered from nowhere. The skin on his neck tightened. He recoiled, stumbling back into the center of the room, heart clamoring. Was this the product of stress, the mind cracking under the strain of disrupted routine and domestic upheaval? He had to know. He needed to rule out a simple draft. With trembling fingers, Elias peeled back the strip of tape. The aperture beneath seemed wider now, perhaps dilated by another inch. He couldn't be certain. The dimness played tricks. Leaning in again, ear hovering near the void, a sudden exhalation of frigid air struck his face, sharp and invasive, making him flinch violently. This cold felt alien, ancient, utterly out of place within his familiar walls. Then the voice, no longer a mere suggestion but a distinct, undeniable whisper from the darkness. "Elias, help me." His hands began to shake uncontrollably. The forgotten piece of tape fluttered from his grasp to the debris-strewn floor. Who's there? The question emerged as a ragged whisper, swallowed by the oppressive silence of the room. His own heartbeat thundered, a frantic drum against the quiet. From the wall, the response came, soft yet imbued with a chilling urgency. "I need you to come closer." He scanned the shadowed corners, the empty doorways. Alone. Utterly alone. Yet the voice was intimate, immediate, seeming to originate just beyond the thin membrane of plaster. Elias fought for composure, forcing shallow breaths, one hesitant step, then another. He leaned forward, extending a tentative finger into the void, searching for a draft source, a hidden pipe, anything mundane. His fingertip brushed against something profoundly cold, slick with a strange dampness. A subtle pressure, like a faint current, seemed to tug from the other side. He snatched his hand back as if burned, wiping it instinctively on his jeans, adrenaline singing through his veins. "How?" he stammered, the question absurd even as he voiced it. "How are you in there?" From the depths, the whisper returned. "Stuck. So long. Please." Elias glanced wildly around the room, his thoughts racing. Police? The building super? How could he articulate this creeping horror? "Officer, there's a voice in my wall?" They'd dismiss him as delusional. He leaned closer again, his own voice strained. What do you want?" The reply was thin, spectral. "Talk to me. Stay." A strange current pulled at Elias, a bizarre admixture of chilling dread and unwelcome empathy. The desperation in that unseen voice felt undeniably real, yet the logistics were impossible. This wasn't some ancient manor prone to secret passages. It was a modern structure, that section of wall supposedly solid. He spent what felt like an eternity conversing with the void, asking questions met only with evasions and renewed pleas. "Help me out, don't leave." The voice clung to his name, offering thanks each time he murmured reassurance. All the while, tension coiled in his shoulders, his gaze flicking nervously around the dim room. And the hole. It was undeniably expanding. Almost imperceptibly, yet steadily, the edges crumbled, flaking fine powder onto the floor. Another inch, perhaps more. Sometimes a faint, dry scraping noise accompanied the decay, horribly suggestive of fingernails dragged across stone. Weariness pressed down on Elias, heavy as the unnatural silence. The day's upheaval bled into this nocturnal phantasm. I need to rest," he managed, his voice thick. A sound akin to a whimper emanated from the wall. "No, please don't go." "I'll be back," Elias promised, though the words felt hollow. "In the morning." A tremor ran through him, a deep-seated disquiet. He left a single dim lamp burning in the living room, a feeble sentinel against the encroaching unknown, before retreating to his bedroom. The click of the lock, a mechanism previously ignored, resonated with newfound significance, a flimsy shield against... What? Sleep was a fractured landscape. He drifted, only to be jolted awake by imagined sounds. The hole widening like a hungry mouth, footsteps padding softly just outside his door. Each time he surfaced, the silence felt heavier, more watchful. Dawn arrived, filtered through grime and exhaustion, leaving Elias with a throbbing head and trembling hands. He forced himself into the living room. The aperture in the wall had yawned wider overnight, easily 6 inches across now, revealing not insulation or studs, but a darkness that seemed to recede inwards. A tunnel. Retrieving a flashlight from a kitchen drawer choked with renovation debris, he aimed its beam into the void. The light penetrated only a short distance before being swallowed, hinting at a passage snaking back into unseen depths. The walls within looked rough, primitive. He called out his name softly. Silence answered. Just as the silence began to feel absolute, his phone buzzed, a text from Volkov. Family emergency. He wouldn't be back until tomorrow. Elias was alone with it for another day. The day became a blur of anxious pacing, punctuated by frequent, compulsive checks on the hole. By late afternoon, a new sound began, faint, intermittent tapping from within the wall, delicate, almost questioning. Tap, tap, tap. Elias crouched, pressing his ear near the opening once more. The familiar, invasive cold kissed his skin. He tensed. Then the voice, quieter than before, almost fragile. Still here. Elias released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Who are you?" he demanded, needing an anchor, a name, anything. A pause stretched from the darkness. "I don't know." The words sent a fresh wave of ice through Elias's veins. His pulse hammered at his temples as he stared into the lightless passage. "I only know," the voice added, faint as dust motes. "I need your help." Frustration warred with fear. "How can I help if I don't know anything?" Elias argued with the darkness, stepping closer. The hole's rim was ragged, actively shedding plaster onto the floor around his feet. The only reply was that same weak refrain, "Please, don't leave." Resolve hardened within him. He had to know more. Rolling up his sleeve, Elias cautiously inserted his arm into the opening, pushing deeper, past his elbow. The air inside was profoundly cold, clinging damply to his skin. The passage walls felt rough, abrasive, like unfinished rock. His questing fingers met only void. He stretched further, ignoring the rising panic, the wrongness of it all. Then, contact. A feather-light brush against the back of his hand, ephemeral yet distinct. Instinct screamed, another hand. He ripped his arm back with a choked gasp, heart hammering, skin erupting in goose flesh. He stared, wide-eyed at the opening, half expecting a pale limb to emerge. Nothing, just the waiting darkness. The sudden shriek of his phone vibrating in his pocket nearly sent him through the ceiling. A friend. He fumbled through a nonsensical excuse about being busy, his eyes still fixed on the wall. When he looked properly again, the hole seemed larger still, 8 inches, maybe more. The floor around it was littered with fresh detritus. The wall was steadily, inexorably opening. As twilight deepened, painting the room in shades of gray and indigo, the voice from the wall grew frantic. Its pleas became fragmented. Help, so cold, help me, laced with an unnerving desperation that twisted Elias's insides. Torn between terror and a sickening pity, he tried rapping on adjacent walls, listening for hollowness. Nothing but solid thuds. The structure felt sound, ordinary. This anomaly, this presence, defied all logic. He retrieved a crowbar from his scattered tools, the cold metal heavy in his hand. Could he risk widening the breach? See what lay within? The fear of unleashing something unknown warred with the insistent, pathetic cries. He tapped the plaster near the hole. "I feel that," the voice whispered, startlingly close. Elias's skin crawled, hesitantly at first, then, with more force, he began prying at the edges. Chunks of plaster rained down, exposing more of the dark passage. He aimed his flashlight beam inside again. It revealed a narrow channel snaking back a few feet before curving sharply out of sight. A gust of air pushed outwards, striking him full in the face, unbelievably, bitingly cold. It stung his eyes, bringing involuntary tears. His teeth began to chatter violently. Can you move closer?" he asked, his voice trembling. No answer, only a sound like a long, drawn-out sigh, disturbingly near. Leaning forward, sweeping the flashlight beam, his breath caught. A shape. Vague, indistinct in the wavering light, but unmistakably the curve of a shoulder, pale against the deeper blackness. It retreated instantly, melting back into the shadows. Elias stumbled back, collapsing onto the floor, legs suddenly unstrung. It was real. Something physical resided within his wall. Elias remained on the floor, mind reeling. "Don't leave me alone," the voice pleaded from the darkness. His heart hammered, a frantic bird trapped in his chest. Despite the pervasive chill, sweat slicked his skin. "I'm here," he rasped. I don't know what to do." The following hour crawled by. He attacked the wall again, chipping away with the crowbar until the opening was large enough to accommodate his arm and shoulder. Dust filled the air, raw and choking. The passage within seemed impossibly narrow, twisting away to the right. "Come in," the voice urged, a silken command. But it was too small. He needed more leverage, more force. A sledgehammer, worry gnawed, structural integrity, the lateness of the hour. Volkov was unavailable. He stared at the breach he'd made, almost large enough now. The voice was a tangible presence, its breath a bizarre mingling of ice and stale earth, ghost in his cheek. "Wait," Elias said, his voice dry. "I'll get a bigger tool." As he rose, heading for the hall closet, the voice cried out, sharp with panic. "Hurry, it's closing." Elias spun back. Did the edges of the hole seem to shimmer, vibrate? He touched the wall beside it, a fleeting warmth, then instantly cold again. He scrambled to the closet, retrieved the heavy sledgehammer, its weight a grim reality. He swung, the impact jarring through his arms, again and again. Plaster and concrete fragments flew. His muscles screamed. Finally, the gap was wide enough. Crouching low, he thrust his head and shoulders into the opening. The temperature plummeted instantly. His breath plumed white in the flashlight beam. He wriggled forward, scraping his sides until he was halfway in. The passage snaked immediately right, barely wide enough to crawl, the walls coarse, as if crudely hewn. His pulse roared in his ears. "This way," the voice called, drawing him onward, even as every nerve ending screamed retreat. His flashlight beam stuttered, threatening darkness. The cold was agonizing now, sinking into his bones. His teeth chattered uncontrollably, his fingers felt deadened. He forced himself a few inches deeper, back scraping against the rough-hewn wall. A scraping noise erupted, louder this time, echoing claustrophobically in the narrow confines. A leaden dread settled in his gut. Images of the wall ceiling shut behind him. Could he even turn around in this suffocating space? Suddenly, the barest whisper of a touch on his shoulder. He flinched violently, almost fumbling the failing light. He twisted, aiming the beam back. Nothing. Only the oppressive dark and the palpable presence. The voice was right beside him now, intimate. "Thank you." The words breathed directly into his ear, raising every hair on his body. "I can't see you," Elias cried, his voice thin and reedy. "Where are you?" "Here," it replied, and he felt another phantom brush against his arm, a chilling suggestion of guidance. He was at his breaking point. Breath sawing in his chest, drenched in icy sweat, trapped. No plan. No way back if things went wrong. I need help," he gasped, the words torn from him. "I'll come back, with someone." Panic flared in the voice. "Please, no, don't leave me." Elias stared down the Stygian passage, the dying flashlight beam catching glimpses of raw, indifferent stone. His heart felt bruised from its frantic beating. He began to inch backward, boots scraping, ignoring the desperate, pleading cries. "No, don't go. Elias." Forcing himself out of the suffocating embrace of the wall, back towards the dim lamplight of his living room, his mind teetering on the abyss of terror. He tumbled back into the relative safety of his living room, gasping, air burning his lungs. Sweat mingled with plaster dust on his face. The gaping wound in the wall remained, a dark maw exhaling impossible cold. He collapsed against the dust-sheeted couch, the heavy sledgehammer still clutched in his white-knuckled grip. His whole frame shuddered with reaction. From the depths, the voice still called, weaker now, but persistent. Elias stayed where he was, paralyzed. He couldn't go back in there alone. There was no rational framework for this. The impossible passage, the disembodied voice, the terrifying cold. Something resided beyond the plaster and lath, something ancient or alien, and it wanted him. It claimed to need help, but its pull felt predatory. Waiting for Volkov, for the sanity of daylight and another human presence, seemed the only option. He remained there through the long hours, huddled in the dim lamplight, forcing measured breaths, his gaze fixed unblinkingly on the black opening. Sometimes he thought he saw movement within the shadows. Sometimes a frigid draft would snake out to touch his skin. The voice faded, becoming intermittent, but never ceased entirely. A quiet, insistent thread of his name woven into the silence, a lonely sound in the dead of night. Sleep was unthinkable. He just sat, gripping the hammer, watching the darkness and waiting for the dawn. Corrosion wept orange tears down the iron bars as the gate groaned, a lament of decay spilling into the breathless night. I paused, a single foot trespassing on the tangled path toward the derelict Briarcliff Sanatorium. Before us, the structure ascended into the gloom, its shattered windows like sightless orbits weeping shadows, fixing us with a vacant, judgmental gaze. A profound wrongness settled in my gut. This venture felt ill-starred, yet the siren call of the forbidden, amplified by the prodding insistence of my companions, drew me onward. Elias, don't falter now. Cora's voice sliced through the stillness from further up the path, her torch carving erratic blades of light across the sanatorium's leprous facade. The threshold awaits. Drawing a breath that felt thin and inadequate, I committed my other foot to the grounds. Behind me, the gate swung closed with a metallic finality, a sound that resonated deep in my bones, sealing the threshold. Our quartet consisted of Cora, our impetuous catalyst, Ronan, her boyfriend and our grounded counterpoint, Sylvie, our dedicated chronicler of shadows, and myself, the hesitant conscience perpetually overruled. Weeks this expedition had brewed, simmering since Cora unearthed some lurid article detailing the sanatorium's malignant chronicle. Birthed in the 19th century, shuttered abruptly in the 1970s amidst whispers of torment and unholy science, Briarcliff festered in local lore. Phantom chasers and adrenaline junkies had probed its perimeter, only to be repulsed by structural collapse or the intervention of law enforcement. But this night felt different. A stark full moon offered skeletal illumination, and Cora's cousin, nested within the constabulary, had assured her of minimal patrols. It was an opportunity suspended, ripe for the taking. Closing on the main entrance, the palpable gravity of sorrow's past seemed to condense around us. Crude sigils scarred the lower walls, vibrant obscenities failing to mask the institution's bleak narrative. Sylvie raised her camera, the flash momentarily bleaching the decrepit veranda, capturing its decay. "All right, remember the protocol," Cora hissed, her voice tight with suppressed exhilaration. "We maintain cohesion, minimal contact with anything. If one person bails, we all withdraw. Understood?" Nods answered her, though I caught Ronan's subtle eye roll. His disdain for spectral pursuits was plain, yet his presence was non-negotiable. He wouldn't let Cora venture into the abyss alone. The primary doors were bound by a heavy chain, a futile ward Ronan dispatched with swift, brutal efficiency, using the bolt cutters he'd procured. The links surrendered with a clang that reverberated, swallowed by the immense silence. Cora applied pressure, and the door yielded, exhaling a breath of stale confinement, thick with spores and the scent of oblivion. To step inside was to cross into a stilled dimension. Our torch beams dissected the gloom, revealing a reception chamber suspended in decay's amber. Dust-shrouded chairs stood sentinel along the walls. An archaic front desk presided over a scatter of decrepit testaments left to rot alongside desiccated flora. "Astonishing," Sylvie murmured, the camera's shutter clicking like a frantic pulse, as if they simply vanished mid-breath. We pressed further into the sanatorium's gullet, our footfalls echoing against walls, shedding their paint like flaking skin. My light snagged on an inscription gouged into the surface, a frantic plea. "Save me." A knot tightened in my stomach. I forced down a rising chill. The deeper we penetrated, the more the air thickened, pressing like a shroud heavy with dust and dissolution. We navigated past former treatment rooms, their apparatus rusted and baleful in the fragmented light. A derailed chariot of suffering, an overturned gurney, in one corridor startled us collectively, its wheels emitting a faint, protesting squeak as our passage disturbed its decades-long inertia. "Elias, look at this," Ronan called out, his voice unnaturally resonant in the dead air. He stood before a slab of scarred iron, a heavy door brutalized by deep gouges. Someone was desperate to leave this particular party. As we congregated, a detail pricked my awareness. This door, unlike the pervasive grime coating every other surface, possessed a peculiar cleanliness, as if recently wiped. Before the observation could fully form into words, Cora was already shoving it inward. The space beyond was an absolute void, instantly devouring the light from our torches. As we crossed the threshold, I registered a tangible shift in the unseen currents. The air grew colder, stirred by a faint draft inexplicable within the sealed heart of the building. "People, this feels wrong," I started, my voice a strained whisper. "Perhaps we should reconsider." The sentence died unfinished. A resounding concussion slammed behind us as the door obliterated our path of retreat, plunging us into impenetrable darkness. Sylvie cried out, followed by the sharp clatter of her camera striking the unforgiven floor. "What in God's name?" Ronan's voice was taut, frayed edges of panic showing. "Cora, where are you? Is everyone intact?" My hands trembled violently as I wrestled with my torch. When light finally bloomed, it illuminated an impossibility. The decrepit asylum interior had vanished, replaced by what appeared to be a sterile theater of chrome and quiet hums, stainless steel gleaming under soft, ambient light. "This cannot be," Cora breathed, her earlier bravado utterly fractured. "Where have we come?" No answer was offered. Instead, a panel hissed open at the room's far end. A figure emerged, silhouetted against an unseen light source, its geometry grotesque, mocking the human form. Height exaggerated, limbs elongated, jointed at impossible angles. "Welcome," it intoned, the voice like shearing metal, devoid of warmth or inflection. "Your arrival was anticipated." Primal terror erupted. we wheeled, desperate for the vanished door, only to find a seamless, unyielding wall where it had stood. Entrapment was absolute. What ensued was a disorienting fugue of flashing strobes, shrieking alarms, and the ceaseless, terrifying proximity of our inhuman captors. They propelled us through labyrinthine corridors, isolating us, subjecting us to invasive procedures and examinations that defy coherent description. Time dissolved. Hours bled into days, or perhaps mere moments stretched into an eternity, before I found myself deposited back in that initial, impossible chamber, reunited with the others. We were altered, irrevocably marked in ways both subtle and profound. Sylvie's eyes held an unnatural luminescence in the low light. Ronan's skin possessed a subdermal quicksilver glimmer. Cora was present, yet fundamentally absent, a vessel inhabited by something other. The entity reappeared, observing us. Its featureless countenance somehow conveyed a detached, clinical curiosity. The parameters are met. The experiment concludes successfully, it rasped. You are permitted egress. And just like that, we stood once more before the abandoned sanatorium, the night air cool on our skin as if the ordeal had never transpired. Yet we knew. The building's windows now pulsed with an otherworldly light. A low, mechanical hum vibrated from its core. We stumbled away, each cocooned in shock, struggling to reconcile the violation inflicted upon us. Reaching the gate, I cast a final glance backward. The sanatorium seemed to ripple, its structure momentarily wavering, a veil lifted to reveal its true nature. Not a relic of human misery, but a sophisticated facade concealing something far more advanced, utterly alien. We never discussed that night, not in any meaningful way. What words could contain such an experience? Who would grant credence to such a tale? Yet, sometimes, catching the unsettling radiance in Sylvie's gaze, or observing how Ronan's skin catches light with inorganic precision, serves as a brutal reminder. Our adventure was terrifyingly real. And late, when the moon hangs full and the world sleeps, I sometimes fancy I hear it, that synthesized echo beckoning me back to Briarcliff, back to the place where reality fractured, where, I suspect, fragments of my being remain captive. I tell myself I don't know if we unearthed some dormant malignancy that night or simply trespassed into the incomprehensible. I tell myself that the next whisper of exploring forgotten places will send me sprinting the other way. Some unknowns, surely, are best left undisturbed. Some doors eternally sealed. Yet, even as I cling to this resolve, the conviction persists that our ordeal at Briarcliff was merely an overture. That elsewhere, veiled in decay and neglect, similar theaters operate, and I am left to contemplate, with a chilling blend of dread and morbid fascination, what unfolds when the force orchestrating these events tires of concealment. For now, I maintain a facade of normalcy, but a sentinel within remains perpetually vigilant, scanning for fissures in the mundane, for proof that the world is not as it seems. Because once you have glimpsed the horrifying machinery beneath reality, ignorance is an irrecoverable luxury. And ultimately, the most terrifying discovery wasn't what resided within that sanatorium. It's the unshakable knowledge that it persists, waiting, patient and predatory for its next unwitting subjects. The desiccated parchment of fallen leaves disintegrated under my boots, each step a sharp report against the profound quietude that had descended upon the woods. 15 years I'd walked these paths as a warden of Whisperwind Peak's preserve. Yet this patrol resonated with an unfamiliar dissonance. An oppressive weight hung in the air, the distinct prickling certainty of unseen eyes tracking my progress. Rounding a knot of ancient hemlocks, I found it. A rough-hewn encampment secreted amongst the undergrowth, starkly defined by a scatter of spent brass casings and the grim detritus of butchered animals. My pulse hammered against my ribs. This was no misplaced hiker, no carelessly tended fire, but something altogether more predatory. My name is Elias Vance. What follows is a chronicle of how a day sworn to the rhythm of the wild warped into a desperate gamble for life against men who stalked more than just game. The wilderness was my genesis. Raised in a hamlet clinging to the mountain skirts, the forest felt more like home than any four walls ever did. To become a warden was less a choice than an inevitability, a means to safeguard the untamed expanse that had shaped me. Whisperwind Peaks had been my sanctuary and my charge for a decade. I knew its veins of water, its stony knuckles, its hidden hollows as intimately as my own breath. That particular dawn broke like any other. I'd shouldered my pack before first light, provisioned for a long traverse through the preserve's less trodden territories. The autumn air possessed a crystalline bite, and the turning foliage ignited the canopy in fiery bursts of crimson and gold. It ought to have been serene, a tableau of peace. But an insistent wrongness permeated the woods from the moment my boots met the trail. The familiar symphony, the trill of unseen birds, the susurrus of leaves, the fleeting scuttle of small life, was unnervingly subdued, as though the forest itself held its breath in fearful anticipation. I tried to dismiss the unease as mere phantoms of fatigue, yet 15 seasons had honed an instinct I dared not ignore. Perhaps 3 hours into my trek, the discordant notes became undeniable. Branches snapped with deliberate force, not the random fractures of weather or beast, boot impressions too recent, sunk too deeply into the loam for casual wanderers. Access had been restricted for a week, citing fire hazard. And then the miasma, a cloying sweetness laced with putrescence, a scent I knew with sickening familiarity, the unmistakable signature of decay. Guided by scent and the trail of violation, I pressed onward, diverting from established paths into a denser, shadowed tract of the preserve. It was there I stumbled upon the camp. Masterfully concealed it was, nestled within a small clearing screened by thick brush. Yet, to my practiced gaze, its purpose was brutally apparent. Camouflaged tarps stretched taut between trunks formed crude shelters. A fire pit, engineered for minimal smoke, lay cold at its heart. But the surrounding paraphernalia turned my blood to ice. Coiled snares and menacing steel traps, high-caliber rifles propped carelessly against bark, and everywhere the grisly testament to their commerce. Heaps of animal hides, severed antlers, trophies of slaughter. Whispers of poaching syndicates had drifted through the region, but never had I encountered evidence so brazen, so substantial. This wasn't opportunistic hunting. This was organized, efficient, and lethally serious. My hand moved towards the radio clipped to my vest, fingers poised to summon aid, when the sharp crack of a twig spun me around. Instinct drew my hand towards the canister of deterrent spray on my belt, but reflexes proved insufficient. "Well now," rasped a coarse voice. "Seems we flushed ourselves a warden, boys." 3 figures materialized from the dappled gloom, rifles leveled, unwavering, at my center mass. They bore the weathered, unforgiving look of men accustomed to living beyond the margins of law. The apparent leader, a tall man distinguished by a livid scar bisecting his cheek, offered a grin devoid of warmth, purely predatory. "Question is," he pondered aloud, advancing a step, "what do we do with you?" Slowly, deliberately, I raised my hands, my mind scrambling for purchase. "Listen," I began, striving for a calm I didn't feel. "You don't want this trouble. Assaulting a federal officer only digs your hole deeper. Let's just talk this through." His laugh was a harsh bark that ricocheted through the clearing. "Talk? Friend, I don't think you grasp the gravity here. Ain't no talking your way clear of this." Another man, younger, his voice tight with nerves, interjected. "Silas, maybe we just tie him up. Leave him. We can be gone clean." Silas shook his head, the predatory amusement vanishing. "No, he's seen the operation. Can't afford that loose end." A cold dread solidified in my gut as the implications struck home. These weren't merely poachers, they were prepared to kill, and I was the immediate complication. In that instant, primal instinct surged. I threw myself sideways and down, simultaneously ripping the deterrent spray free. As I hit the forest floor, the air split with the report of a rifle, the supersonic whine of a bullet slicing the space where my head had been moments before. I rolled, scrabbling into a low crouch, and discharged a blinding stream of spray directly into the face of the nearest man. He shrieked, dropping his weapon, hands clawing frantically at his eyes. I didn't linger to assess the others. I ran, plunging into the dense undergrowth, branches lashing my face, fueled by sheer terror. Behind me, shouts erupted, the crashing sounds of pursuit confirming they were close. I possessed the advantage of terrain knowledge, but they had numbers and firearms. My only chance lay in evasion, in finding a sliver of distance to make the call. I ran until my lungs burned like acid and my legs screamed in protest. Yet stopping was unthinkable. Periodic shouts or the snap of a distant branch served as grim reminders that the hunt continued. A plan began to coalesce amidst the panic, reach a point with reception, summon the cavalry. The nearest station lay miles distant, but the old fire lookout on Serpent's Tooth summit, that might offer a signal. It meant a brutal ascent, but it was the only viable path. Veering towards the summit's base, the ground steepened, growing treacherous. Loose scree shifted underfoot, threatening my balance repeatedly. Fear, however, proved a potent fuel. Halfway up the exposed ridge, I risked a brief pause, flattening myself against a granite outcrop, straining to hear over my own ragged gasps and the frantic drumming of my heart. For a few precious seconds, only the wind in my pulse filled the silence, then carried on an updraft. There, see him, up on the ridge. Panic lent wings to my exhaustion. I scrambled upward, abandoning stealth, focused solely on the skeletal silhouette of the tower against the vast sky. Cresting the summit, I practically vaulted onto the rusted metal stairs, taking them in desperate bounds, praying my device could find purchase in the ether. At the summit platform, breathless, trembling, I fumbled for my phone. A single, fragile bar flickered. It would have to suffice. I stabbed the dispatch number, my gaze sweeping the tree line below for movement. Warden Elias Vance, I choked out the instant the connection crackled. Requesting immediate assistance, Serpent's Tooth Summit lookout, armed hostiles in pursuit, shots fired, repeat, shots. A metallic ping beside me sent me sprawling onto the grated floor, the phone clattering from my grasp. Nowhere left to climb, Warden. Silas's voice floated up, laced with smug certainty. Might as well come on down. He wasn't wrong. I was cornered, but the call, however truncated, had gone through. The question now was one of timing. The ensuing hour stretched into an eternity. The poachers, wary of the exposed climb, settled below, content to wait me out. They knew, as I did, that descending meant walking directly into their sights. As the sun bled towards the horizon, painting the heavens in strokes of violent orange and bruised purple, the most beautiful sound I'd ever known sliced through the tension. The percussive thrum of helicopter rotors. The poachers heard it too. Their alarmed shouts were a symphony to my ears. What followed was a controlled storm of activity. Preserve helicopters, state troopers, even a tactical unit materialized, converging on the summit. Outnumbered and outgunned, Silas and his men surrendered without further struggle. Helped down from the tower, legs unsteady but spirit intact, I was awash in a turbulent sea of relief, exhaustion, and a grim sort of pride. I had looked into the abyss of human avarice and clawed my way back. More than that, my desperate flight had led to the dismantling of a shadow operation that had plagued these peaks for months. In the subsequent days and weeks, recounting the events for reports and testimony, my thoughts often returned to that harrowing passage through the woods. The razor-thin membrane between ordered patrols and raw survival. The unsettling proximity of savagery beneath the veneer of civilization. I remain a warden. The forest remains my domain, the place my soul resonates most keenly. But now, a deeper awareness walks with me on the trails, a knowledge of the darkness that can gather in the shadows. I move with greater caution, listen more intently, and hold a profound gratitude for the quiet days, the patrols unmarked by incident. For I understand now, with chilling clarity, that in the heart of the wild, everything can pivot in a heartbeat. And sometimes the most dangerous predators are those who walk upright.